As security closes in and laughter rings across the marble floor, Camille Doyle, waitress in a thrifted dress, faces a room ready to exile her. But when the club's most powerful guest halts everything, whose truth will shatter the silence? Camille Doyle nervously smoothed the worn fabric of her thrift store dress, the floral print a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings. The Lakeshire Country Club was a world away from her usual haunts, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the clinking of crystal glasses. She clutched the invitation, its edges softened with age, her knuckles white. The marble foyer gleamed under the weight of glittering chandeliers, casting halos that seemed to mock her scuffed flats. Taking a deep breath, Camille stepped further into the room, the murmur of polite conversation washing over her. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, each glance a silent judgment. Wealthy patrons, draped in designer clothes, paused their conversations to stare, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and disdain. She saw a few whispers, a pointed nudge of an elbow, confirming her fears: she didn't belong. Pushing past the discomfort, Camille scanned the crowd, searching for a familiar face. Her sister had promised to meet her near the entrance. But before she could spot her, a sharp laugh sliced through the air. Verity Ellison, the club president's daughter, stood surrounded by a gaggle of equally polished women. Her eyes, cold and calculating, landed on Camille. Verity's gaze raked over Camille's dress, her hair, the nervous way she held herself. A smirk twisted her lips. "Did you get lost on your way to the kitchen?" Verity's voice carried, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Right block 2 with a target length between 700 and 1,000 words." The laughter that followed Verity's remark felt like a physical blow. Camille's cheeks flushed crimson, a wave of humiliation washing over her. Verity, emboldened by the attention, approached with a practiced, almost predatory grace. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Perhaps you're looking for the service entrance?" Verity asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "Or maybe you need directions to the staff quarters? I'm sure someone can point you in the right direction." She gestured vaguely towards the back of the club, her diamond bracelet catching the light. Camille swallowed, trying to maintain some semblance of composure. "No, thank you," she managed, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm here for the scholarship ceremony. I'm looking for my sister." Verity's eyebrows arched in exaggerated surprise. "The scholarship ceremony? My dear, this event is for members and their families. Are you certain you have the right place? Perhaps you mistook it for a job fair?" She paused, letting the insinuation hang in the air. "Unless, are you one of the servers? I didn't realize they allowed the staff to mingle with the guests before their shifts." The crowd's attention was now fully focused on Camille. Verity's friends tittered, their eyes glittering with amusement. One of them discreetly filmed the encounter on her phone, the red recording light a stark reminder of Camille's public shaming. Others whispered cruel remarks, their words like tiny daggers. "Look at that dress," one murmured. "So last season, or maybe last decade," another snickered. "Probably borrowed it from her grandmother," a third chimed in. Camille felt her face burning. She tried to stand her ground, to explain that she had been invited, that she deserved to be there, but the words caught in her throat. The weight of their judgment was suffocating. I have an invitation," she stammered, fumbling in her small clutch for the crumpled card. Verity waved her hand dismissively. "Really, there's no need to make a scene. I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. I wouldn't want you to embarrass yourself further." She turned to a passing security guard, a burly man with a stern expression. "Excuse me," Verity said, her voice regaining its usual imperious tone. "This woman seems to be causing a disturbance. I believe she may have wandered in without proper authorization. Perhaps you could escort her out? We must maintain the club's standards, after all." The security guard approached Camille, his gaze impassive. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Camille looked around the room, her heart sinking. No one was coming to her aid. No one was offering a word of support. They were all content to watch her humiliation unfold. Even the staff members, who should have understood her situation, avoided her gaze. She felt utterly alone, a stranger in a hostile land. Her carefully constructed facade of confidence crumbled, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. She retreated towards the exit, her head bowed, her shoulders slumped. Each step felt like a defeat, a confirmation of her deepest insecurities. The laughter and whispers followed her, a constant reminder of her failure. As she reached the door, she glanced back one last time, hoping against hope that her sister would appear, that someone would intervene. But the room remained unchanged, a sea of indifferent faces. The humiliation was complete. She pushed open the heavy door and stepped out into the cool evening air, the glittering lights of the Lakeshire Country Club fading behind her, leaving her in the shadows. Write block 3 with a target length between 700 and 1,000 words. Verity, feeling a surge of triumph, rejoined her friends, basking in their shared disdain for the interloper. She smoothed down her designer dress, the silk whispering against her skin, a comforting reminder of her status. Internally, she justified her actions. She was simply upholding the exclusivity of the club, protecting its members from unwanted intrusions. It was her duty, she told herself, to maintain order and decorum, to keep the riffraff out. Honestly, Verity said, her voice dripping with self-righteousness, some people have absolutely no sense of propriety. Imagine crashing an event like this. The nerve. Her friends nodded in agreement, showering her with praise for her quick thinking and decisive action. They congratulated her on handling the situation so gracefully, on preventing a potential embarrassment to the club. Verity preened under their approval, savoring the moment. The mood in the club quickly reset. The laughter and chatter resumed, the clinking of glasses filled the air, and the scholarship ceremony proceeded as if nothing had happened. Verity congratulated herself on maintaining order, on preserving the sanctity of their exclusive world. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, her smile radiant. Meanwhile, Camille stood alone near the entrance, blinking back tears. The cool evening air did little to soothe her burning cheeks. She clutched the invitation tighter, the paper crinkling in her trembling hands. She scanned the crowd again, her eyes searching for her sister, but the sea of faces remained unfamiliar and unwelcoming. Where was she? Had something happened? Doubt gnawed at her, adding to her already overwhelming sense of despair. Suddenly, a hush fell over the crowd. The murmur of conversation died down, the clinking of glasses ceased, and all eyes turned towards the dais. A distinguished older man in a tailored suit strode purposefully forward, his presence commanding attention. He raised a hand, silencing the speaker who had been addressing the audience. Murmurs rippled through the room. Who was he? What was happening? Something important was clearly unfolding. The staff members scrambled to attention, their faces etched with concern. The elite guests, their curiosity piqued, leaned forward, eager to witness the unfolding drama. The man addressed the security guard, his voice firm but polite. Please escort the young woman who was just asked to leave back into the room. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled guests. Immediately, a wave of confusion washed over the crowd. Who was he talking about? What was going on? Verity, her smile faltering, exchanged a puzzled glance with her friends. They shrugged, equally bewildered. The security guard, after a moment of hesitation, hurried towards the entrance, his face a mask of professional neutrality. He reappeared a few moments later, escorting Camille back into the room. Camille, her eyes wide with disbelief, followed him hesitantly. She couldn't understand what was happening. Why were they bringing her back? Had there been some mistake? Her heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of hope and apprehension swirling within her. The man's eyes locked onto Camille's, his expression kind and reassuring. He nodded slightly, beckoning her forward. Then, in a clear, commanding voice that resonated throughout the room, he announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption. However, there has been a slight misunderstanding. This young woman," he gestured towards Camille, "has been specifically requested to be here tonight by the club's newest major benefactor." He paused for effect, letting his words sink in. "And I assure you, her presence is of utmost importance." Gasps and whispers erupted throughout the room. The benefactor? Who was the benefactor? And why had they requested this waitress? Verity's confident smirk vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. Her carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble. Write block 4 with a target length between 700 and 1,000 words. The crowd parted, like the Red Sea before Moses, as Camille was ushered forward. All eyes were on her, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, confusion, and, in some cases, outright hostility. She felt like a lamb being led to the slaughter, exposed and vulnerable under the intense scrutiny. Verity, recovering from her initial shock, stepped directly in front of Camille, blocking her path. Her eyes narrowed, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and indignation. "Excuse me," she said, her tone sharp and demanding. "But I think we all deserve an explanation. Why is she so important? What possible reason could the benefactor have for requesting her presence?" The benefactor, unflappable, raised a hand, signaling for silence. He smiled, a warm and genuine expression that contrasted sharply with Verity's icy glare. "All in good time, my dear," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "All in good time." He turned towards the back of the room and gave a subtle nod. A figure emerged from the shadows, walking towards them with an air of quiet confidence. As she drew closer, Camille recognized her instantly. It was her sister. But this wasn't the sister she knew, the one who worked tirelessly at 2 jobs to make ends meet. This woman was impeccably dressed in a designer gown, her hair styled to perfection, her entire demeanor radiating success and sophistication. Camille stared in disbelief, unable to reconcile this vision with the image she held in her mind. Her sister reached them, her eyes sparkling with warmth and affection. She greeted Camille with a hug, her embrace a reassuring anchor in the swirling sea of confusion. "Camille," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I'm so glad you're here." She turned to the benefactor, offering him a grateful smile. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison. I appreciate you doing this." Mr. Harrison, the distinguished older man, beamed at her. "It's my pleasure, Ms. Doyle. It's an honor to be associated with such a remarkable young woman." He addressed the crowd, his voice regaining its commanding tone. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce you to Camille Doyle, the recipient of this year's prestigious Lakeshire Country Club scholarship." A collective gasp swept through the room. Camille? The scholarship recipient? It was impossible. This woman, dressed in a thrift store dress, couldn't possibly be the one they were honoring. Mr. Harrison continued, his voice filled with admiration. "Camille was selected not for her wealth or social standing, but for her remarkable work ethic, her unwavering determination, and her exceptional character. She is a shining example of what can be achieved through hard work and perseverance." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "And," he added with a twinkle in his eye, "her scholarship is being generously sponsored by her own sister, Ms. Eleanor Doyle, a newly successful entrepreneur and a proud member of this community." The room erupted in a cacophony of whispers and murmurs. Eleanor Doyle? The successful entrepreneur? It was all starting to make sense. But it was also incredibly embarrassing. They had all misjudged Camille, dismissing her as an outsider, a nobody, when in reality, she was a guest of honor, a symbol of hope and inspiration. Verity stood speechless, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. Her carefully constructed facade of superiority had crumbled, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. How could this waitress be so important? It defied everything she believed in. Camille, standing tall beside her sister, felt a surge of pride and gratitude. Her modest attire, once a source of shame, now felt like a symbol of her values, a reminder of her humble roots. She looked at Verity, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and understanding. She knew what it was like to feel insecure, to feel the need to put others down in order to feel superior. But she also knew that true strength came from within, from embracing her own unique worth, regardless of what others thought. She stepped forward, her voice clear and confident. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison," she said, her gaze sweeping across the assembled guests. "And thank you, Eleanor, for believing in me. I am truly honored to receive this scholarship, and I promise to make the most of this opportunity." The room was filled with a tense mix of admiration, regret, and shame. Camille's true significance had been revealed, and the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The laughter and whispers had ceased, replaced by a heavy silence, a palpable sense of unease. Write block 5 with a target length between 700 and 1,000 words. Mr. Harrison turned his attention to Verity, his expression hardening. His voice, though still measured, carried a sharp edge. "Ms. Ellison," he said, his gaze unwavering, "I am deeply disappointed by your behavior. Such elitism and cruelty have no place at Lakeshire Country Club. We pride ourselves on being a welcoming and inclusive community, and your actions have undermined everything we stand for." He paused, his eyes sweeping across the room. "I believe this is an opportune moment to remind everyone that respect and integrity are the cornerstones of our organization. We must treat each other with kindness and compassion, regardless of our backgrounds or social standing. Anything less is unacceptable." The crowd quickly distanced themselves from Verity, stepping back as if she carried a contagious disease. Whispers rippled through the room, and several guests began filming her reaction on their phones, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and schadenfreude. Verity, once the center of attention, was now an outcast, a pariah. In the aftermath, Verity approached Camille with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a thin, brittle thing stretched across her face. "Lost, are we?" she asked, her voice syrupy sweet, the kind usually reserved for elderly members or potential donors. "Or perhaps you're looking for the staff entrance? It's around back, through the kitchen. I can have someone show you." The implication hung heavy in the air. You don't belong here. Camille's hands tightened on the worn invitation. She lifted her chin a fraction, trying to project an assurance she didn't feel. "Actually," she said, her voice wavering only slightly, "I'm here for the scholarship ceremony. I'm looking for my sister." Verity's smile faltered for a split second before snapping back into place, sharper this time. "Your sister? I wasn't aware the waitstaff were invited to these functions. Are you certain there isn't some mistake? This event is for members and their families, not outside help." She made a sweeping gesture, taking in Camille's simple dress and scuffed flats. The words were carefully chosen, designed to wound without being overtly offensive, but the venom was unmistakable. The crowd's attention, already piqued by Verity's initial outburst, now focused entirely on Camille. Verity's friends, a cluster of perfectly coiffed and designer-clad women, tittered behind their hands, their eyes darting between Camille and Verity with undisguised amusement. One of them, a blonde named Sloane, discreetly began filming on her phone. Others whispered cruel remarks, their words like tiny daggers. "Did you see the shoes? Thrift store chic, darling, so embarrassing." Camille felt her cheeks burn. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the marble floor and be swallowed whole. She tried to stand her ground, to assert her right to be there, but the words caught in her throat. I have an invitation, she stammered, fumbling in her small clutch bag. My sister, she works very hard, and I'm proud of her. Verity waved a dismissive hand, cutting her off. Oh, I'm sure she does. But this is the Lakeshire Country Club, darling. We have standards to uphold. One can't just waltz in off the street. She turned to a nearby security guard, a burly man named Dwayne with a perpetually bored expression. Dwayne, would you be a dear and escort this young lady off the premises? I believe she's confused about the nature of this event. Dwayne lumbered forward, his eyes scanning the room, avoiding direct eye contact with Camille. Ma'am, he said, his voice low and apologetic, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. The room fell silent. All eyes were on Camille as she stood there, alone and exposed, her invitation clutched in her trembling hand. She looked around, desperately searching for a friendly face, a sign of support, but found only cold indifference, thinly veiled amusement, or outright disdain. No one came to her aid. No one spoke up in her defense. The humiliation was complete. With her head bowed, Camille turned and began to retreat toward the exit. Each step felt like a crushing weight, each glance a searing brand. She could feel their eyes on her back, their judgment a palpable force. The glittering chandeliers seemed to mock her, their light reflecting off the polished marble, highlighting her every flaw, every inadequacy. As she reached the doorway, she paused for a moment, taking a deep breath to steady herself. The scent of expensive perfume and freshly cut flowers, which had initially seemed so intoxicating, now felt suffocating, a symbol of the vast chasm that separated her from this world. She pushed open the heavy door and stepped out into the cool evening air, leaving the laughter and scorn behind. The Lakeshire Country Club, with all its dazzling splendor, had never felt so cruel. Whispers rippled through the room, and several guests began filming her reaction on their phones, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and schadenfreude. Verity, once the center of attention, was now an outcast, a pariah. In the aftermath, Verity faced disciplinary action, her privileges were suspended, and she became the subject of gossip and online backlash as clips of her humiliation went viral. Camille stood alone near the entrance, the heavy oak doors looming like a barrier between her and the normal world. The Lakeshire Country Club, with its manicured lawns and air of untouchable privilege, had felt like another planet. She blinked, trying to clear the sting from her eyes. Tears threatened, traitorous and unwanted. She wouldn't let them fall. Not here. Not now. She smoothed down the fabric of her thrift store dress, a futile gesture, and clutched the worn invitation in her hand, the paper soft and familiar against her skin. She scanned the room one last time, hoping against hope to catch a glimpse of her sister, Evelyn. Evelyn, who always believed in her, who had practically dragged her into applying for the scholarship in the first place. You deserve this, Camille, she'd said, her voice full of unwavering faith. You work harder than anyone I know. But Evelyn wasn't here. Not yet. And Camille couldn't face another minute in this gilded cage. She was about to turn and leave, to retreat back to the familiar comfort of her small apartment and the diner where she worked, when a sudden hush fell over the crowd. The murmur of polite conversation died down, replaced by an expectant silence. Camille turned back, drawn by the change in atmosphere. All eyes were now fixed on the dais at the far end of the room. A distinguished older man in a tailored suit, his silver hair neatly combed, had stepped forward. He raised a hand, pausing the ongoing presentations with a gesture of quiet authority. The room held its breath. He spoke, his voice carrying easily across the hushed space. Excuse me, he said, his tone polite but firm. I believe there has been a misunderstanding. He gestured towards the security guards who were still hovering near the entrance, their faces etched with confusion. "Please," he said, addressing them directly. "Escort that young woman back inside." Camille's heart leaped into her throat. Was he talking about her? Impossible. She looked around, half expecting to see someone else, someone more deserving, step forward. But no one moved. The elite guests, their faces a mixture of curiosity and bewilderment, remained frozen in place. The security guards hesitated, glancing at each other, unsure of how to proceed. They seemed reluctant to contradict the man on the dais, but equally hesitant to disregard Verity's earlier pronouncements. The older man's gaze swept across the room, his eyes sharp and intelligent. He seemed to assess the situation in an instant, taking in the expressions of the guests, the hesitation of the security guards, the stunned silence that had fallen over the room. He took a step forward, his movements deliberate and purposeful. "I insist," he said, his voice now carrying a note of steel. "That young woman is a guest of honor here tonight. She should not be treated with such discourtesy." The security guards, finally spurred into action, moved towards Camille, their expressions apologetic. "Ma'am," one of them said, his voice low. "Please come with us." Camille, still reeling from the sudden turn of events, allowed herself to be led back into the room. The eyes of the guests followed her every move, their expressions now tinged with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. What was going on? Who was this woman, and why was she suddenly so important? As she walked towards the dais, the older man's eyes locked onto hers. There was something in his gaze, a warmth and understanding that put her slightly at ease. He offered her a small, encouraging smile. He cleared his throat, drawing the attention of the entire room back to him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice clear and commanding. "I have an important announcement to make." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "We are incredibly fortunate to have with us tonight the newest major benefactor of the Lakeshire Country Club Scholarship Fund. And this benefactor," he continued, his eyes still fixed on Camille, "has specifically requested the presence of Miss Camille Doyle." A collective gasp swept through the room. Camille? A benefactor had asked for her? It was absurd, unbelievable. She felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. This couldn't be happening. The room erupted in a flurry of whispers. Who was Camille Doyle? Why was she so important? And what was her connection to the club's newest benefactor? Verity Ellison, who had been basking in the glow of her earlier triumph, stood frozen in place, her confident smirk replaced by an expression of utter disbelief. Her eyes narrowed, and a flicker of anger sparked within them. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was Verity Ellison, the club president's daughter, the queen bee of Lakeshire. How dare this nobody steal her thunder? The older man gestured towards the crowd, a subtle invitation for them to part and allow Camille to pass. The guests, eager to witness what was about to unfold, readily complied, creating a path for her through the center of the room. Camille walked forward, her legs feeling like lead. The spotlight seemed to intensify, and she could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her. She tried to maintain her composure, to keep her head held high, but her hands were trembling, and her heart was pounding in her chest. Just as she reached the edge of the dais, just as she was about to step into the full glare of the spotlight, Verity Ellison stepped into her path. Her face was flushed, and her eyes were blazing with anger. "Wait," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Just a minute. I want to know what's going on here. Why is she so important? Why is everyone making such a fuss over her?" She pointed a manicured finger at Camille. "She's just a waitress. What makes her so special? Write block 4 with a target length between 800 and 1000 words. Return only the prose text, with no headings or labels." Before anyone could answer, a familiar face appeared from behind the older man, stepping into view with an elegant grace that immediately commanded attention. It was Evelyn. Evelyn, Camille's sister, impeccably dressed in a sophisticated black dress that shimmered under the chandeliers. Her hair, usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, was styled in soft waves that framed her face. She looked every inch the successful businesswoman. A collective gasp rippled through the room. The murmurs intensified, morphing into a chorus of surprised exclamations. The truth was about to be revealed, and everyone present knew it. Evelyn smiled warmly at Camille, her eyes filled with love and pride. She reached out and took Camille's arm, gently guiding her forward. "It's okay, Camille," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I'm here." The older man, his expression calm and reassuring, nodded to Evelyn. He then turned to the crowd, his voice resonating with authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "I would like to introduce you to Miss Camille Doyle, the recipient of this year's prestigious Lakeshire Country Club scholarship." A wave of astonishment washed over the room. The scholarship? This woman, dressed in a simple thrift store dress, was the scholarship recipient? It didn't seem possible. The older man continued, his voice emphasizing each word. Miss Doyle was selected not for her wealth or social standing, but for her remarkable work ethic, her unwavering determination, and her exceptional character. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. She is a shining example of what can be achieved through hard work and dedication. He then turned to Evelyn, his eyes filled with admiration. "And I would also like to introduce you to Miss Evelyn Doyle, Camille's sister, and the newest major benefactor of the Lakeshire Country Club Scholarship Fund." The room erupted in a cacophony of gasps and whispers. Evelyn Doyle? The successful entrepreneur who had recently made headlines with her innovative tech startup? She was Camille's sister? Verity Ellison stood speechless, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. Her carefully constructed world had just been shattered. Everything she thought she knew about Camille Doyle, about the world, about herself, had been turned upside down. The older man continued, his voice unwavering. "Evelyn Doyle, a former Lakeshire resident herself, has chosen to give back to her community by sponsoring this scholarship in her sister's name. She believes in supporting bright, deserving individuals like Camille, regardless of their background or financial circumstances." Evelyn smiled at the crowd, her eyes sparkling with warmth and sincerity. "I am incredibly proud of my sister," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "She has overcome so many obstacles to get where she is today. She is an inspiration to me, and I know she will do great things." Camille stood tall, her initial nervousness replaced by a sense of quiet confidence. She looked at her sister, her heart overflowing with gratitude. Evelyn had always been her rock, her champion, her biggest supporter. And now, she had given her the opportunity of a lifetime. She turned to the older man, her eyes shining with sincerity. "Thank you," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Thank you for this incredible opportunity. I promise I won't let you down." She then addressed the crowd, her voice filled with emotion. "I know I may not look like I belong here," she said, gesturing to her simple dress. "But I believe that true worth is not measured by what you wear or where you come from, but by what you do and who you are." She paused, her eyes sweeping across the room. "I am honored to be the recipient of this scholarship, and I am grateful for the opportunity to pursue my dreams. I will work hard, I will dedicate myself to my studies, and I will strive to make a positive impact on the world." The room was filled with a tense mix of admiration, regret, and shame. Many of the guests, who had earlier dismissed Camille as an outsider, now looked at her with a newfound respect. They realized that they had misjudged her, that they had allowed their prejudices to blind them to her true worth. Verity Ellison, still reeling from the revelations, remained silent, her face flushed with embarrassment. She could feel the eyes of the crowd upon her, judging her, condemning her. She had made a terrible mistake, and she knew it. Camille's true significance had been revealed, and the atmosphere in the room had been irrevocably changed. The story was far from over, but one thing was clear: Camille Doyle was no longer an outsider. She was a force to be reckoned with. Write block 5 with a target length between 700 and 900 words. Return only the prose text, with no headings or labels. The older man, whose name was revealed to be Mr. Harrison, the club president, turned his attention to Verity. His voice, though still calm, carried a distinct edge. "Verity," he said, his gaze unwavering, "your behavior this evening has been unacceptable. Such elitism and cruelty have no place at Lakeshire Country Club." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "We pride ourselves on being a welcoming and inclusive community, a place where everyone feels valued and respected. Your actions have undermined those values, and I am deeply disappointed." Mr. Harrison then addressed the entire room, his voice resonating with sincerity. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I want to take this opportunity to remind us all of the importance of respect and integrity. We must treat each other with kindness and compassion, regardless of our differences. We must judge people not by their appearance or their social standing, but by their character and their actions." He paused, his eyes sweeping across the room. "Tonight, we have witnessed the power of perseverance, the importance of giving back, and the transformative potential of education. Let us all learn from this experience and strive to create a more just and equitable world." The crowd, humbled by Mr. Harrison's words, nodded in agreement. They were ashamed of their earlier behavior, and they were determined to do better. The room quickly distanced themselves from Verity, whispering and staring. Some guests, eager to capture the moment, began filming her reaction for social media. Verity, once the queen bee of Lakeshire, was now a pariah, an outcast. In the aftermath, Verity faced disciplinary action. Her club privileges were suspended, and she became the subject of gossip and online backlash as clips of her humiliation went viral. Her reputation, once impeccable, was now tarnished beyond repair. Later that evening, after the scholarship ceremony had concluded, Verity found herself alone in the hallway, face to face with Camille. The encounter was awkward and tense. Verity stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Camille," she said, her eyes filled with a mixture of shame and resentment. I wanted to apologize. I was wrong. I shouldn't have treated you that way." Camille looked at Verity, her expression calm and knowing. She saw the hurt and humiliation in Verity's eyes, but she also saw the arrogance and entitlement that had fueled her earlier behavior. She offered Verity a small, knowing smile. "It's okay, Verity," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I understand." She didn't say anything else. She didn't offer forgiveness, and she didn't gloat. She simply acknowledged Verity's apology and moved on. Camille then turned and walked away, leaving Verity standing alone in the hallway. Camille exited the club with her sister, head held high. Evelyn wrapped her arm around Camille's shoulders, her eyes filled with pride. They walked out into the cool evening air, leaving the Lakeshire Country Club behind them. The entire room watched in silence as Camille and Evelyn departed, the atmosphere changed and reputations redefined. The guests were left to reflect on their own prejudices and biases, to consider the true meaning of worth and success. The story ends with Camille's quiet triumph. A woman of substance, walking away from a world that had finally seen her worth. She had faced humiliation and adversity, but she had emerged stronger and more determined than ever. She had proven that true worth is not measured by wealth or social standing, but by character and resilience. And she had shown the world that even a simple waitress in a thrift store dress could achieve great things. The crowd parted as Camille was ushered forward, all eyes on her. It felt like walking through water, each step heavy, deliberate. The air crackled with anticipation, a silent question hanging in the balance. She could feel Verity's glare boring into her back, a physical weight. As she drew closer to the dais, Verity, her face a mask of disbelief, stepped directly in her path. "Just a moment," Verity said, her voice tight, almost strangled. "I think we're all a little confused. Why is she so important? What makes her so special that she deserves this kind of attention?" The benefactor, a man who exuded quiet authority, raised a hand, silencing the murmurs that had begun to ripple through the room. "Patience, Verity. All will be explained." He gave a subtle nod, and a figure emerged from behind him, a woman whose presence immediately commanded attention. Camille's breath caught in her throat. It was her sister. Standing tall and poised, radiating confidence in a tailored pantsuit that screamed success, was Eleanor. Eleanor smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached her eyes, and extended a hand towards Camille. "Camille," Eleanor said, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "I'm so glad you're here." She took Camille's arm, her touch both familiar and reassuring. "I wanted to be the one to tell you." Eleanor led Camille to the center of the dais, facing the assembled guests. The benefactor stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the room, a hint of steel in his eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice resonating with authority. "I understand there may be some confusion regarding Miss Doyle's presence here today. Let me assure you, she is not here by mistake. In fact, she is the guest of honor." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Verity stood frozen, her carefully constructed facade crumbling before her eyes. "Miss Camille Doyle," the benefactor continued, "is the recipient of this year's Lakeshire Country Club scholarship. A scholarship awarded not based on wealth or social standing, but on merit, dedication, and exceptional character." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "This scholarship is generously funded by one of our newest and most significant benefactors, Miss Eleanor Doyle." The room erupted in a cacophony of whispers and murmurs. Eleanor squeezed Camille's hand, her eyes filled with pride. Camille felt a wave of emotion wash over her, disbelief, gratitude, and a fierce surge of vindication. "Camille," Eleanor began, addressing the crowd directly, "has worked tirelessly to support herself while pursuing her education. She embodies the values of hard work, perseverance, and integrity that this club should strive to uphold. She could have asked me for help at any time, but she was determined to do it on her own. That's the kind of person she is." Camille stood tall, her modest attire suddenly transformed. It was no longer a symbol of her lack of wealth, but a declaration of her values, her refusal to compromise her integrity. She looked directly at Verity, who was now pale and trembling, her carefully crafted world imploding around her. "I want to thank the benefactor," Camille said, her voice clear and steady, "for this incredible opportunity. And I want to thank my sister, Eleanor, for her unwavering support and belief in me. I promise to make you both proud." A smattering of applause broke out, growing steadily louder as more and more guests joined in. The atmosphere in the room had shifted dramatically. The earlier scorn and condescension had been replaced by a tense mix of admiration, regret, and, in some cases, outright shame. The truth had been revealed, and it had shattered the carefully constructed illusion of superiority that had permeated the Lakeshire Country Club. The benefactor, Mr. Abernathy, turned his attention back to Verity, his expression hardening. "Miss Ellison," he said, his voice carrying through the now hushed room, "your behavior this evening has been regrettable. Lakeshire Country Club should be a place of respect and opportunity, not a breeding ground for elitism and cruelty. I trust this is a lesson you will not soon forget." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Heads turned, whispers erupted, and smartphones were discreetly raised, capturing Verity's mortified expression for posterity. The carefully curated image of the perfect club president's daughter was crumbling before their very eyes. Even her circle of designer-clad friends began to subtly distance themselves, their giggles replaced by nervous glances and hushed conversations. The social calculus of the Lakeshire Country Club was being recalculated in real time. The fallout was swift and merciless. Within days, Verity faced disciplinary action from the club's board. Her privileges were suspended, and her reputation was tarnished beyond repair. The incident became a viral sensation, with clips of her initial taunts and subsequent humiliation circulating online, accompanied by scathing commentary and widespread condemnation. The Lakeshire Country Club, once a symbol of exclusivity and privilege, was now synonymous with elitism and hypocrisy. A few days later, Camille found herself alone in the hallway, gathering her things to leave when she saw Verity approaching. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her usual confidence replaced by a palpable vulnerability. "Camille," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper, I wanted to apologize. For what I said, for how I acted. It was wrong. I was wrong." Camille looked at her, her expression calm and composed. She saw not just the spoiled, entitled girl who had tried to humiliate her, but a young woman who was now grappling with the consequences of her actions. There was no satisfaction in Verity's downfall, only a quiet understanding. "Thank you, Verity," Camille said softly. She offered a small, knowing smile, a gesture of forgiveness rather than triumph. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving Verity standing alone in the hallway, the weight of her actions pressing down on her. Camille exited the Lakeshire Country Club with Eleanor by her side, her head held high. The entire room watched in silence, the atmosphere transformed. The gilded cage had lost its luster, the power dynamics irrevocably shifted. The truth had not only been revealed but had also reshaped the landscape, exposing the cracks in the foundation of privilege and highlighting the enduring strength of character. The story ends not with a grand pronouncement or a dramatic confrontation, but with Camille's quiet triumph. A woman of substance, walking away from a world that had finally been forced to see her worth, leaving behind a legacy of resilience, integrity, and the enduring power of truth. The chandeliers still glittered, the perfume still lingered, but the air was different now, infused with a newfound awareness and a lingering sense of unease. The Lakeshire Country Club would never be quite the same again. The benefactor turned to Verity, his gaze unwavering, and a hush fell over the room once more. "Verity," he said, his voice carrying with a quiet authority that made even the most seasoned members shift uncomfortably, "your behavior this evening was unacceptable. Elitism and cruelty have no place within these walls. Lakeshire Country Club should be a place of respect, integrity, and opportunity, not a stage for prejudice." He paused, letting his words sink in, his eyes sweeping across the faces in the room. "This scholarship, funded by Ms. Doyle, is meant to uplift those who demonstrate exceptional promise, regardless of their background. Your attempt to demean someone who embodies the very qualities we seek to encourage is deeply disappointing." A collective intake of breath rippled through the crowd. Verity visibly recoiled, her carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of his disapproval. The whispers started again, louder this time, laced with judgment and speculation. Several guests subtly angled their phones, capturing her mortified expression for posterity. The swiftness with which the crowd distanced themselves from her was almost comical, a stark illustration of the fickle nature of social currency. In the ensuing days, Verity's fall from grace was swift and merciless. The club's board, facing intense pressure from its members and the devastating publicity, suspended her privileges indefinitely. The story, fueled by surreptitiously filmed clips of her initial taunts and subsequent humiliation, went viral, transforming her into a cautionary tale of privilege and unchecked arrogance. The online backlash was relentless, a torrent of criticism that spared no detail of her life or past behavior. A week later, Camille found herself walking down a quiet hallway within the club. She was there to finalize some paperwork related to the scholarship and its administration, ensuring that the funds would be used to support future recipients like herself. As she rounded a corner, she found Verity standing alone, near a large window overlooking the manicured grounds. Verity looked up, startled, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. She seemed smaller, somehow, stripped of her usual confidence and designer armor. "Camille," she mumbled, her voice barely audible. I wanted to apologize. For what I said. What I did." Camille stopped, regarding her with a calm, knowing gaze. She saw not only the remnants of Verity's arrogance but also a flicker of genuine regret. "It's all right, Verity," Camille said softly, though she knew it wasn't really all right. "I understand." Verity stammered, struggling to find the right words. I was wrong. So wrong. I let my own insecurities get the better of me." She paused, searching Camille's face for any sign of forgiveness. I hope someday you can forgive me." Camille simply offered a small, enigmatic smile. It wasn't a smile of triumph or vindication, but one of understanding and acceptance. She knew that Verity's journey was just beginning, and that the consequences of her actions would likely stay with her for a long time. She didn't need to gloat or offer empty platitudes. Her presence alone, her quiet dignity, spoke volumes. Without another word, Camille turned and continued down the hallway, leaving Verity standing alone by the window, contemplating the wreckage of her carefully constructed world. Camille exited the club with her sister, Anya, who waited patiently by the entrance, a warm smile on her face. The air outside felt cleaner, fresher, than the perfumed atmosphere within. As they walked toward Anya's waiting car, Camille could feel the weight of the evening lifting from her shoulders. The entire room watched in silence as they departed, the atmosphere thick with unspoken thoughts and shifting allegiances. Some looked on with newfound respect, others with lingering resentment, and still others with a dawning awareness of their own complicity in the events that had transpired. The story ends with Camille's quiet triumph, a woman of substance walking away from a world that had finally been forced to see her worth, leaving behind a legacy of resilience, integrity, and the enduring power of truth. The chandeliers still glittered, the perfume still lingered, but the air was different now, infused with a newfound awareness and a lingering sense of unease. The Lakeshire Country Club would never be quite the same again.